And for having me, Ann and Allison. My name is Peter Olivares. I'm a fellow with the Office of Community Engagement, working with rural and tribal communities specifically. Today, I'll be talking about a bit of the context behind the funding coming out of the DOE, as well as a bit of context about our office, why we were stood up, how long we've been in action, and the niche that we're supposed to fill within the department. And then I'll get into a few specific funding opportunities that are really geared towards rural, tribal, and otherwise, small and medium-sized communities. I'll give a note here that some of my funding slides will be a bit text heavy, so I won't read everything that's there, but they will have a bunch of live links that you can click on when Allison shares the slides out after this meeting. So, either feel free to click on those links, and of course, I'll put my contact information in the chat at the end of this presentation in case anybody here would like to follow up with me directly, which I would encourage. All right, so a bit of context to start out here, as Ann was mentioning, between the Inflation Reduction Act, between the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and depending if you count the CHIPS Act as well, the CHIPS and Science Act, it really is a time of historic funding opportunities, really since 2021, when the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed. And what that means from a DOE perspective is that for the first time in DOE's 57 plus year history, we're moving really from a research and development institution to a deployment, commercialization, and really a community engagement facing federal agency, which is a fairly new type of expertise and process for the DOE, because of course in the past, most of our stakeholders have been private R&D outfits, university corporations and labs and so forth, folks that are really into the nitty-gritty on the technical side of the energy system. But of course, with the passage of Bill and IRA, that has now changed for the better, because so much of our funding is now community facing for communities, for local governments, state governments, NGOs, really a wide breadth and depth of participants that are now eligible for DOE funding that weren't for the past decades. So a really exciting time to be in the energy world here. And with that being said, our office was stood up not so much a year ago, around November of 2023 of last year, through a secretarial order from Secretary Jennifer Granholm. She recognized that, again, with the passage of Bill and IRA, we needed to have dedicated staff, dedicated offices, and really just a cadre of expertise within the department that knows how to engage appropriately with the communities that will be feeling, that will hopefully be feeling the benefits of the funding opportunities that we have coming out of the department. So with that being said, our mission and our task really is to serve as the front door to the DOE. There's been a variety of these types of initiatives in the past, from some of our program and technology offices to serve as point of contacts for industry, for universities, and for other R&D types of companies. But we didn't really have that function for communities, for community-based organizations, for small municipal governments in which many of the staff members there wear many, multiple hats and so forth. So we were really stood up to be the first line of communication with under-resourced, understaffed, and otherwise disadvantaged communities who just wouldn't be too sure where to start with the Department of Energy. So that's really the role that we play. We're really meant to be that first line of communication with communities who are looking to learn more about the DOE because they haven't necessarily had a prior relationship with the department in the past. And with that said, just putting it into words here, we serve as a two-way conduit between communities and DOE. We serve depending on what adjective you want to use, we serve a navigator function, a connector function, a matchmaker function, things of that nature, really to ensure that communities, number one, are aware of the opportunities that are either applied directly to them or apply to private sector entities which are looking to build infrastructure in their communities. So we really just, want to make communities aware of, again, this historic time with reference to, all the funding that is coming out of our department. And with that being said, from the two-way conduit perspective, we also like to receive feedback from communities that we can then bring back to the department about, struggles with applications or struggles with reporting requirements or, any type of community level feedback that would be useful for DOE to have when designing and redesigning our funding programs. So with that said here, getting into our office structure, as you can see on the map here, we are a place-based team. Myself, I am physically based in Colorado. My colleague Cece Horvat, who I believe is on the call here today, she's in California. Our director, Rose Dottie, who also is concurrently serving as a Midwestern specialist, is based in Michigan. Jeremiah Rivera is based in Texas. And Corrine Taylor is based in the DMV area. And Genevieve Cruz is based in Portland, Oregon, which is ironic at this point in time, but she still is carrying the mantle for the Northeast, and she's been a great resource for communities in that region of the country as well. And an important note here, this is the general contact information for our office. As I mentioned, I will put my contact information directly into the chat after this is over. But if you want to have something kind of quick and dirty for, just to have something to write down for folks to reach out to, we have our email address that's here on the screen, as well as our Get Engaged phone number. This will link you with one of our technical assistants at our office, who can then either connect you with us directly or help to answer your questions. With that being said, the most important link I'd like to highlight on this slide here is the third link from the top, which is our biweekly office hours. Somewhat of a similar format to what we're doing here in this meeting, but every 2 weeks, we coordinate with DOE program offices to have them present, kind of do a fairly in-depth presentation on their funding opportunities, their technical assistance opportunities, or maybe recent program selections from a recently closed funding opportunity, in which it's important to let community members know about who was selected in their community and what's the process for engaging with them. So again, these links will all be shared in the slides when Allison shares this after, but I would certainly encourage folks on the call here, if you're available and if you have time, they are every other Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So great way to get engaged and to learn more about our programs and to hear directly from DOE staff regarding the funding that is coming out of our department. And with that here, I'd like to jump into a bit of our funding and technical assistance opportunities. This is certainly not a fully comprehensive list of all the opportunities that are coming out of the department. I think I would need a minimum of 4 to 5 hours to cover all of that. But here, this will give a nice flavor of some opportunities that were made specifically to cater to rural and tribal and small communities here. And again, all of the links here will be live. You'll be able to click on them when the slides are shared. And then I will have a slide all the way at the end of the presentation that has a litany of different funding links and so forth, where you can access more information as well as other similar programs. So I'd like to start out here with what is the biggest explicitly rural-focused program at DOE, which is called the Energy Improvements in Rural or Remote Areas Program, or ERA for short. It's managed by our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, also known as OSED, which I'm sure that some of you are familiar with. And this is for a $400 million funding round for community-focused clean energy solutions in rural and remote areas. I won't read all of the project details and all the eligibility, but as you can see from the screen here, the eligibility is essentially for any type of organization in the United States that is not an individual human being. So tribes, state and local governments, nonprofits, the private sector, co-ops, institutions of higher education like Arizona State, as well as a litany of incorporated and unincorporated consortia. The funding will range from $2 to $50 million per project, and there will be at minimum a 5% non-federal cost share requirement. And I will note that the 5% cost share requirement usually is applying to tribes most of the time, but there is further detail explicitly mentioned in the full notice of funding opportunity, which folks can learn more about there. But this is an extremely broad, a very flexible program that covers really the gamut of the entire energy system and actions that can work to modernize the system in order to increase reliability and to lower energy costs and to bring jobs to rural and tribal areas, which otherwise face energy insecurity in one form or another. The next 2 funding opportunities are going to be from our Office of Indian Energy, explicitly for tribes and tribal colleges, as you can see here on the screen. The first opportunity is a $5 million federal funding opportunity to support tribal colleges and universities in planning for clean energy. So it's strategic planning, it's energy analysis, energy audits, development of an energy office or an organization, so we can fund capacity in this respect as well, which we always hear is an extremely important need of the tribes that are requesting this type of funding. But then it also, includes things like policy development, codes development, as well as workforce training and development programs as well. So again, a very broad set of actions that you can take here. The webinar is happening today in about an hour and a half. Those slides, unfortunately, I think that might be a bit too late for folks here, but the slides will be available on the IE, the Office of Indian Energy website in the very near future. And then the second opportunity is a larger opportunity, both funding-wise and eligibility-wise. This is a $25 million funding opportunity, which is kind of a follow-up round to a $25 million opportunity that was published last year for energy planning and development for all forms of tribes. So tribes in the lower 48, Alaska Native regional corporations, but also village corporations, intertribal organizations that have more than 2 tribal participants, and also tribal energy development organizations. So developers, but also utilities as well. And this is for planning, it's for feasibility studies, and also for design and development activities as well. So really exciting to see this, building on the Office of Indian Energy's funding that they've put out over the last few years in order to really spur the deployment of clean energy on Indian lands, which we know is key, of course, for lowering energy costs and also increasing energy security of the tribes as well. Moving on here, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide here because for folks, who have a bit of a relationship with the DOE from the past, would know that so much of U.S. national policy, to the degree that we do have a national policy, has been enacted through tax credits. And of course, that goes back all the way to the 70s and the 80s when DOE and Treasury were incentivizing unconventional oil and gas development. But of course, up through the modern day, starting with things like the Energy Policy Act of 2005, but also the Recovery Act of 2009 from the Obama-Biden administration, going all the way up to the Infrastructure Law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of the emphasis or a lot of the strategies for the deployment of clean energy is through tax credits. And the really big deal here, which I'm sure that some of you are familiar with here, is elective or direct pay, which means that entities who do not pay taxes, who don't have tax bills, like tribes, like governments, like nonprofits, and so forth, for the first time, they are now eligible for the tax credits. So, there's a simple example here on the screen about how, if a local government invests $1 million in a tax credit eligible clean energy project, if they use prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards, they'll get a 30% credit, which is $300,000 in a quote unquote cash payment from the IRS. And the thing that I would like to note here as well is that the department is very conscious of the fact that even though Congress has made tax credits eligible to these entities for the first time, which is a massive opportunity, it still takes a bit of work, expertise, and administrative capacity to really take advantage of these tax credits. So with that being said, one of the ways in which DOE is trying to make the process a bit easier for understaffed and disadvantaged communities is through a funding opportunity for blueprints for communities. And this is the link that's on the bottom right here. It's a live link, so you'll be able to click this when you have the slides. It was an opportunity put out by our Office of Policy to fund nonprofit and other technical assistance organizations to develop really step-by-step blueprints that can be shared with communities, written in very simple, plain English, with a step-by-step guide of how to take advantage of the tax credits. So these are the forms you need. This is when you submit them. This is who you submit them to. This is what the timeline should look like. Really somewhat of a form of hand-holding to make these tax credits easier to obtain for communities that we know really need them. And I think the last thing that I should note about that is that this elective pay blueprints opportunity, it closed in August of this year. And I believe the timeline for the blueprints actually being available on the DOE website to share with communities, I believe is February of 2025. But it will note that on the link that I have on the slide as well. Moving forward here, not going to go too deep into this, but what's important here that I want to note is that what I've been talking about for the last few slides are funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, which are now going forward going to be known as Notice of Funding Opportunities, or NOFOs, which are really the main way that DOE announces its funding to the community. But with that being said, another form or type of funding that the department administers are called prizes. And prizes are usually at a much smaller scale than a funding opportunity, maybe a few $1,000,000 or a few $100,000 compared to tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're really meant for organizations who are just starting to dip their toes in the clean energy world. So these are prizes are generally easier to apply for, 5 to 10 page application, maybe with a short YouTube video as an example of something that I've seen. And they typically have a faster disbursement of funds because the scope of work is a bit narrower and because just the amount to release is also smaller. But with this prize that's been released, it's called the Good Jobs in Clean Energy Prize. The department is going to award a little over $3.3 million to form place-based coalitions. And these coalitions would help to plan for and improve job access and quality within the clean energy economy for specific populations. And I think just the one thing I'll note here is that, on the bottom left, you'll see that the coalitions that are to be formed must include a labor organization, clean energy employers, so like, a project developer, but also CBOs, community-based organizations, as well as public agencies, whether state or local, as well as education and workforce providers. And then I think the last opportunity that I have here explicitly to mention might be the most important in my eyes, because again, the initial opportunities which I was speaking to, such as the Energy Improvements in Rural or Remote Areas program, these have vast amounts of funding with very long applications, very technical applications with a lot of back-end reporting requirements as well. And we know that communities, especially rural and tribal communities, may not always be in a position to be able to apply for and then administer this funding just with the amount of capacity that they have in their community. So I've got 3 programs on the slide here: the Clean Energy to Communities program, the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership program, as well as the Communities Local Energy Action program, also known as Communities LEAP. These are free technical assistance programs. They are competitive, so they do still require an application, but they're free technical assistance programs that really help communities to scope the type of assistance and projects that they want to develop, and really to help them develop the type of technical information that would then go into an application for a much larger funding opportunity. So when we're reaching out to rural communities, to tribes, their governments, but also their community organizations and other small and medium-sized communities, we really want to emphasize that really one of the best ways, other than maybe paying a third-party consultant to compile a lot of this data for you, is to interact with our technical assistance programs to get the data you need to then make your community competitive for a much larger funding opportunity. And we've seen various success stories here. There are tribes all across the US who have taken advantage of these programs that then put them in a position to succeed for future funding opportunities. So for example, a tribal coalition of a tribe in Kansas, as well as Nebraska, I believe, they use the Communities LEAP program on the bottom here to really come up with a plan. So really all the financial and technical specifications of solar and storage deployment on their tribal lands, and how that could then lead to economic, labor, and environmental benefits. And with the data that they received from the Communities LEAP program, they were able to apply for and then win a $100 million competitive grant from the Bureau of Indian Energy's tribal electrification program. So that's just one example there, but we really like to emphasize our technical assistance programs of putting communities in a place where they can be ready to succeed in their competitive applications. And then one thing to note here, of course, I know that folks here on the call are aware of community benefits plans, whether the broad strokes or if you have a bit deeper of knowledge, these are a very important part of post-Bill and IRA DOE policy. They are required for pretty much every single IRA and bill funding opportunity, and they do count for 20% of folks' application scores. So this is a policy and a tool that is being taken very seriously by DOE decision makers when it comes to funding the projects that we want to see and the benefits that we want to see flowing to communities. So the link on the bottom left here will take you to a copy of this map, and really it'll allow community members and other interested folks to see the community, see the projects that are being developed in their community, or the projects that will be developed in their community, as well as the proposed community benefits that the project developer is planning to administer as part of their funding. So a really important tool just to keep communities aware of what's happening around them and the benefits that a community is planning to implement within the community. And then lastly, I won't go deep here, but these links are all live to the EPA, the USDA, and so forth. Just a few other opportunities to keep an eye on, whether it's from the Rural Utility Service Program, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we know is an absolute behemoth of a clean energy deployment program with 3 different intermediary funding opportunities. So certainly something to keep your eyes on there. But I won't go too deep into these programs for today. And then lastly, this slide here is, just probably a very comprehensive list of all of the ways which you can search for funding, access the actual funding documents themselves, as well as other guides that can help you navigate our funding and our technical assistance opportunities. So yeah, won't go too deep here, but all of these links are live, they're all clickable, and they should help you get all the information that you need.